Yes.
Okay, I'm Lori Pest, the chairman of the vetting interview committee for the Cherokee County Republican Party. And I'm going to read a short thing here. The video will be utilized on the Cherokee County Republican Party website. And while we do everything to prevent anyone from obtaining the video without proper use request, there are numerous ways for video to be obtained regardless of the best attempts to secure it. And we are, of course, only placing it on the website. I just want you to understand that. The vetting process is meant to allow members of the party and the community to be able to understand the positions, views, and beliefs of the issues and questions held by those who wish to be elected as a representative of the people. We welcome you, Allan. We appreciate you accepting the invitation to participate in the vetting. And what I'd like to do now, is go around the table and so the committee can introduce themselves, and then we'll start asking the questions. What's that?
Nothing, he's waiting to introduce himself. Jack Saber.
Harry Abrams.
Trenton Adams.
Hurry.
And Bill Guerrero.
Okay. Jack, would you take the first question, please?
Sure.
And who's our timekeeper on this one? Me?
Okay, we'll have Lori.
Not me.
Are you currently a member of your local Republican Party, and how do you see your involvement going forward regardless of the outcome of this election?
I am a member of the Cobb County Republican Party, and I'm not quite clear of the second part of that question.
So how do you see your involvement going forward regardless of the outcome of this election?
I like the Cobb County Republican Party, and I plan to work with them to continue to espouse the Republican cause.
Okay, and let me point out too, you have 2 minutes to answer the questions, so you have plenty of time. Harry, second question?
Do you support right-to-work legislation?
Broadly speaking, no. I haven't really considered that as part of my platform since we have far more serious issues in Washington. I think that employers have a right to hire who they want. It should not be compelled by government to hire particular groups or individuals.
Okay.
Should there be limits on the amount of money businesses and corporations can contribute to political campaigns?
That's a very difficult question to answer. Broadly speaking, they should not be allowed to contribute unlimited amounts of money because they distort elections. At this time, elections are already being distorted through vast amounts of money, which is funneled into campaigns either directly or indirectly. Broadly speaking, the money has to be separated from politics since it has completely corrupted the system.
Mr. Levene, welcome. What unique qualities do you have that are important for a House member to possess?
First quality I have that I tell the truth, something that's rare in Washington. Second, I have not only ideas about what's wrong, lots of people talking about term limits, amendments, getting the deficit under control, so on and so forth. These are basically talking points to get the voters to vote for them. I actually have solutions to these problems. It's no good doing what everybody else is doing. You have to come up with solutions. Albert Einstein once wrote, or once said, that the definition of madness or insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting a different result. The public sends the same politicians to Washington over and over and over again and hopes for a different result. The only way to solve our problems is to have solutions and send people to Washington who are different, because doing the same thing over and over and over again has not produced anything in the way of results of the outcomes that the public wants.
Thank you.
Based on your understanding of the U.S. Constitution, what do you believe the role is of a member of the House of Representatives?
role of a member of the House of Representatives is twofold. One is to represent their district and their problems in Washington, help to resolve them. At this time, because of the critical nature of our debt, national debt, a primary role for a House of Representatives congressman is to resolve that problem so that the U.S. dollar doesn't collapse. That's far more important today to have representations to solve national problems.
Do you believe it's the government's job to ensure all persons have access to health care regardless of ability to pay?
No. I am the only naturalized citizen in this campaign, having been born and raised in England, in London, England. And I have been the recipient, I was the recipient of the national health care system for until I was 21. I know how bad it is and how it caters to the lowest common denominator. People should have access to health care by paying for it out of their own pocket. It's just a matter of how it's paid for under Obamacare, which is, I think, the basis or the genesis of this question. People need to qualify for health care and pay for it, because otherwise we will wind up with a single-payer system. Single-payer system is national health. The insurance premiums will become a tax, and our health system, which is excellent, will be degraded because of the commonality of the problem.
Okay.
What is your position on term limits?
Oh, that's another good question. I love these types of questions. In theory, a term limits amendment will be great, because one of the fundamental problems we have with our political system is people get elected to Washington, and once they're there, they stick and they never leave. They can stay there for 10, 20, 30, 40 years. In some instances, then leave with very large pensions. However, the process of getting a term limits amendment passed is extremely complex and very, very unlikely to ever pass. That said, it's a great tactic for candidates to use to encourage people to vote for them. As I'm a practical man, I have a practical solution. The solution is not a term limits amendment, which won't pass, or may take many years to pass. The solution is to cancel the pensions of both the House of Representative congresspeople as well as the senators if they don't retire within a fixed period. I posit that it will be prudent to do it 8 years, which is 4 terms for the House, and 2 terms or 12 years for the Senate. What that means is that congresspeople can run for re-election, but if they run one too many times, they will lose their very large pensions. As such, you'll find a lot of people in Washington deciding to retire, which is exactly what this country needs, without need for a term limits amendment.
Thank you.
Ms. Levene, what type of federal gun control laws would you support?
From a practical point of view, none. Guns are not the problem. It's what people do with those guns is the potential problem. That's why we have law on the books about brandishing weapons and shooting people and so on and so forth. You basically cannot do it without being charged with a crime. The actual ownership of a weapon is not really the issue. The issue is how is it used. As such, I have no problem with people owning whatever they want.
Thank you. What does the 10th Amendment, excuse me, mean to you?
Just so I'm clear that I respond correctly to this particular amendment, is this the amendment that relates to states' rights?
The 10th Amendment. We don't explain the questions, we give you the question if you however.
I understand. Well, I believe the 10th Amendment relates specifically to state rights. Any right not bestowed upon the federal government is the the word I would want, is what the states choose to do. As such, I have no problem with that. The problem we have is centralized government, and that the federal government coerces and forces states to do certain things they don't think is right for their particular citizens. And as such, unfortunately, the states don't seem to pay much attention to what the 10th Amendment says and does exactly what the Washington tells them to do, and it's unfortunate. So I support states' rights under the 10th Amendment.
Thank you.
Do you believe that states have the right to nullify unconstitutional federal laws?
Yes, they do. This ties into the 10th Amendment. If the law is considered to be unconstitutional, then the state has a duty to its citizens to nullify that particular law. At this point, states, by being coerced by federal funding of various programs that the federal government pays for with, I should say, with borrowed, for the most part, with borrowed money, go along with laws that they may consider unconstitutional because they want the money. However, states should have the backbone and gumption to stand up to the federal government.
Thank you.
Are there any conditions under which you would advocate either raising existing taxes or implementing new taxes?
Actually not. A key part of my platform is to eliminate corporate taxes on a federal level. The reason being is that we would instantly become a global tax haven, if you will. That would mean domestic corporations will bring back their $1 trillion of cash being held overseas. Even Apple Computers, that I looked into, because I used to work for them many years ago, has $100 billion in cash sitting in Ireland. It won't bring it back because there'll be tax on it. It's just basic business. If we eliminate corporate taxes, a number of things will happen. First is that the domestic U.S. corporations will bring back $1 trillion, which will be put to work in the United States economy. Foreign corporations that have trillions of dollars to invest will come to this country and put this money away and put the money creating new jobs, factories, facilities, and so on and so forth. We will have a jobs boom like we've never seen before. This will be the gold rush. Companies will come here and do business and keep their money in the United States because it's a great place to do it. The world's largest consumer economy and industrial economy is the United States. It's soon to become number 2 to China in terms of GDP. We can beat China at its own game by eliminating corporate taxes. The Treasury receives about $275 billion in taxes a year from corporations that spend a fortune hiring CPAs to figure out ways how to dodge and not pay or pay as little as possible. If we instead eliminate corporate taxes and there's a jobs boom, which is what there'll be, and our GDP goes up dramatically, the income taxes from the companies that are hiring like crazy to start manufacturing again will offset the reduction or the loss of revenue from corporate taxes. Plus, there'll be basically full employment, and the employment issues we've been having for the past 5 years or so will just vanish, not quite overnight, but very quickly. So we'll have full employment, we'll have optimism in the future, and we'll have income taxes from the individual without needing to raise them, but the revenue from to the federal government will increase, and we will actually see a golden age for America. What I'm concerned about at the moment is we are killing ourselves. Rather, Washington is killing us, and it needs to end. I plan to stop it.
Thank you. Talking about taxes and so on, I have a couple of questions, financial questions. Have you ever had any license revoked or not renewed for cause, or have been the subject of professional discipline or cited for breach of ethics or unprofessional conduct by any bar association, disciplinary committee, court, administrative agency, or other professional group, or have you been expelled from any organization, and if so, explain why?
No,
Okay. Have you, or has any organization or business under your control ever been declared a bankruptcy or sued or currently facing liens or other financial issues? And if so, explain why.
no,
Okay? And have you ever been arrested or convicted of any crime excluding minor traffic incidents?
no.
Okay? Let's go on with the next question. Bill?
What is your stand on immigration, securing the border, and amnesty, and what is your plan on immigration reform?
This goes back to my full employment issues, which is fundamental to my platform, which is if there is full employment, the urgency to eliminate and block people who want to come to this country, albeit illegally, will be diminished. Typically, all around the globe, wealthier countries are inundated with people who try and get in. People from Eastern Europe try and get into the European Union countries so they can participate in the more wealthier countries. Countries from the Far East and Malaysia try and sneak into Australia. They have a big problem with Australia. People from Latin America typically are trying to get into the United States because they can make more money. I think that we need to have legislation that is enforced. That is to say that people who come here need to have a path to legitimate residency, and that we just need to enforce the laws that we have. Typically in Washington, laws are passed in layers. The game being, if you pass a law, you can go back to your electorate and say, look, I passed this law and this law and this law, and you forget to mention that the law's been passed before in slightly different form over the prior 20 years. So just simple enforcement of laws, and that the politicians do what they say they're going to do, and actually being held accountable, which is what I'll get back to in a second, is really important. The problem we have in Washington is that periodically you hear the word accountable, that this politician needs to be accountable, or somebody has to be accountable, or President Obama said, well, I'm accountable for this. And the truth is the word is meaningless in Washington. It just means nothing at all, except for it's a deflection for the public so they can believe that the politician actually means it. They don't.
Okay. We have 2 minutes for the answers. I just want to stress that. Let's go to the next question, please.
What is your position on the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, and what about drug testing?
I do not believe, fundamentally, I do not want the federal government to be involved in local politics. By local politics in this instance, I mean Georgia politics on a state level. If the state legislature decides they want to, with some sort of grant from the federal government, to allocate it where they choose, then I don't have a problem with that. But I do not want Washington to specifically say we will provide money for these particular programs, because it's not the purview of Washington. The purview of Washington is related to national defense and the national good, and it's state issues which are the subject of what takes place in the Capitol. I think that I don't have any problem with drug testing as required by individual businesses. I do not think it's federal government's position that they require certain businesses to conduct drug testing. It's up to the businesses themselves to require it and enforce it, perhaps on a random basis. I would suggest that the federal government expresses concern and interest in having certain classes of people being drug tested, such as people who drive involved in public transport, people whose lives may be at risk based on their sobriety. But again, it's a state issue. It's not an issue of the federal government.
Thank you.
What is the unemployment rate in Georgia?
What is the unemployment rate?
Correct.
In the 11th
In
district or
Georgia.
across Georgia?
In the state of
I
Georgia.
think in the state of Georgia, it's about 7 7/8% officially. It would be somewhat higher than that unofficially. People dropped off the rolls who don't actively seek employment and not considered to be unemployed. There's a website called Shadow Stats that actually does statistical analysis of things like this, and we typically find that the employment rates officially quoted are completely inaccurate, but politically motivated to justify a variety of programs. This will become a non-question, if you will, if we go back to the elimination of corporate taxes, because not only will there be full employment, anybody who wants a job will find a job, but there'll be more jobs than people. When that happens, incomes go up. People like that. At the moment, there's more people than jobs, it's supply and demand. And because of that, employers pay less because they have a surfeit of talent. So,
Okay. Thank you.
Please describe the geographic boundaries of District 11.
District 11 is all of Bartow and Cherokee County. It's a part of Cobb County to the west of, generally speaking, to the west of I-75. And it goes along 285 inside the perimeter, into Sandy Springs, and down Roswell Road, and then across to include the Governor's Mansion. It was changed in the last redistricting to do something that I fundamentally do not agree with, which I'll put on record. And I do not agree with gerrymandering, in as much as the 11th district is strongly Republican, and a district adjacent to it may be strongly Democrat. And the reason they are is because the state legislatures, every time there's a census, redistrict to allegedly accommodate the increase or decrease in population, redraw the boundaries, and therefore solidify that only Republicans can win a particular seat, such as the 11th district. Or if you're a part of the Democratic Party and you run as a Democrat, then in other districts, you can definitely win those seats. The system needs to be fairer. What I would do as a candidate is very simple, which will make the whole system fair. First is, after each election, force all of the candidates and congresspeople to give all of the leftover campaign funds to charity. That being, if that happens, nobody will have anything in their campaign account. And then they would not be able to start collecting money again until the next election cycle, the next election year. Well, I'm out of time? Yes?
Go ahead and finish your sentence, if you'd like.
What that would do very simply is it will level the playing field and stop money buying elections.
Thank you. Next question.
Sir, for solutions to the traffic and other infrastructure issues, do you support the regional approach, such as the Atlanta Regional Commission, or another method of dealing with these issues?
I have not studied this topic. I know that the congestion is a never-ending problem in this city. I would defer giving an answer until I have an opportunity to examine and make a judgment about the best way to solve the traffic issues we have. Again, I would not like, though, the federal government to say, here's the way you do it, because they tend to be heavy-handed, and instead leave it up to the individual, or to at least the state governments, that intimately know what's going on in their state, in this instance Georgia, so that they can make the best judgment, the best way to do business. I do object to, I'll put one objection on the record, and that is I object to HOV lanes being changed to toll lanes. It was presented as a way to encourage multiple riders in a single vehicle. Therefore, they have an opportunity to bypass the very heavy traffic. And now there's a slow migration over to, if you can afford it, you travel faster because you pay a toll. I do not like that because it just, basically somebody had an end game in mind, and then they made it popular by using the term HOV, high occupancy vehicles, and then they finally got to the end game, which is money for speeding. I don't think that's right.
Thank you.
Right.
What should the federal government's role be in regards to alternative energy sources and subsidies?
Broadly speaking, I do not believe the federal government should get involved in subsidies. The federal government has a reach that has far exceeded its ability to pay. We have a huge deficit, not only because of entitlements, which is destroying this country, but also because the federal government micromanages and gives money for practically anything you can imagine and many things you cannot imagine. So broadly speaking, I do not believe that it should give money for alternate energy projects. I do think that they are a good idea. While we depend on oil and coal for our energy sources, then it will be prudent for companies to evaluate different ways to generate energy other than the traditional oil, gas, and coal methodologies.
Okay. There are a number of issues the agricultural industry is facing in Georgia, including water use, federal regulation compliance, tax reform, and immigration reform. Ms. Levene, what is your plan to address these issues for agriculture in the community of District 11?
I have not done the research in this area, so I am loath to come up with off-the-cuff solutions. It's a very complex problem. I want to go to Washington to fix major problems that we have. Go back to this corporate taxes. We can discuss rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. We can discuss minutiae about who gets to sit where for dinner. But the underlying problem we have in this country, which is what motivates me to go to Washington, is to help resolve our very serious global problems. Everything else will fall into place fairly quickly once we start producing goods and services, mostly goods that people actually want overseas, and we start exporting furiously. And but I cannot address specifically that topic as I haven't researched it enough to give a cogent answer.
Okay.
What is your opinion on the Department of Education?
I was educated in London, England. Did some got a high school diploma, did some college, and then left. I am not impressed with the high school system. I tend to be I tend to favor the 3 R's, if you will: basic quality reading, writing, arithmetic, logic, some of the more bread and butter types of topics. The college system is okay. It's far too expensive. It's far too expensive because if you can breathe, you can get a loan. And if you get a loan, the federal government / taxpayers are responsible to the banks for that loan. It also teaches and entraps college kids into the debt cycle this country has, whereby once you start getting used to borrowing money to pay your current expenses, just like our government does, it never stops, and you spend your whole life in servitude, paying basically high interest loans and always trying to catch up. So in general, I'd like to see a more moderately priced college system and a high school system that focuses on more practical courses rather than some of the more esoteric, and actually works on a series of core curriculums.
Thank you. Do you support the fair tax or consumption tax or some other alternative plan?
I do support the fair tax. I heard about it many, many years ago on the Neil Abort's show. I think it was called another thing, but the tax is very similar, where you pay a 22% or thereabouts tax on everything you buy, your product or the goods and services, and you no longer have to spend your whole year trying to figure out how not to pay income tax or how to reduce your income taxes. We have established a huge bureaucracy in Washington to collect and enforce and punish people for underpaying income taxes, spending many hours trying to collect all their documents together, and it could all be eliminated, including a sizable Washington payroll and local CPA payroll, by eliminating the income tax and going to a flat consumption tax. It's far simpler. The federal government historically collects about 18 to 19% of the GDP in taxes. By collecting 22% or thereabouts as suggested under fair tax or whatever the current estimate is, would be ample to provide all the goods and services that the federal government provides, but doing it in a more equitable manner. The only issue with it is if you have inherited wealth and you don't consume because you have everything you could possibly want, then you don't pay taxes. And whether that tax applies to investing, that you get a haircut of 22% or whatever on investment proceeds, would create an entirely new industry for how to invest to avoid paying this consumption tax. So I would need to look into that more carefully, but on balance, I definitely would think that's a good idea. But unlikely ever to go through in Washington, because the power to tax in Washington is the power to destroy. And our government likes to be able to control the public through taxes. It's wrong, but that's why they like it the way it is.
Okay, thank you.
What do you plan to do for District 11?
Well, I'll obviously represent the voters or the citizens of District 11 in Washington, doing my very best job to voice their concerns. Being a naturalized American citizen, I still have a lot of contacts in Europe. And unlike my fellow candidates, I do have a pretty strong global following. The British government Foreign Office is following this campaign. The European Parliament, that's runs the EU, is following this campaign. If I'm elected, it will be known in a positive way in Europe. If the other candidates are elected, they'll be invisible in Europe, and they'll also, because they'll be freshmen, with Bob Barr being the exception as freshmen, without any ability really to do much at all. I believe that I can bring lots of jobs to this district. In 1996, we had the Summer Olympics here in Atlanta. And one of the reasons that the state of Georgia spent $2 billion on that sporting event is to draw the attention of the whole world onto or into what goes on in Georgia, with the hope that it would bring business to Georgia. Whether it did or not, I really don't know. However, I can do that for nothing because my candidacy is being followed globally, the eyes of the world, especially the eyes of the British Commonwealth, which represents 2 billion people, will be focused on Atlanta, and it will benefit Georgia, Atlanta, and the 11th District. From a more global point of view, again, we're going back to the, this corporate tax issue. If I can eliminate that, everybody in the whole country will benefit because there'll be full employment and increased incomes for our citizens.
Next question, do you agree with the government shutdown?
I think that actually not, the one simple word answer which you're looking for is no. I don't think the government shutdown was of any use. One of the things that never mentioned, but I thought about it, is that the employees of the government had basically a free vacation. They came back to work and they got full pay. So I'm sure many of them took off and went on vacation to Florida or wherever, knowing they will be fully paid and get a free vacation from the benefit or from the pockets of the taxpayers. I object to that. I think if the business was shut down, which it was, then the employee should not have been paid. Broadly speaking, some people who worked got paid, but if you were furloughed, you don't expect to be paid. I think the Republicans screwed the whole thing up. They were ham-fisted about how they tried to stop Obamacare. They could have used other methodologies and techniques. But politicians in Washington grandstand a lot. They're not focused on solutions, they're focused on prominence, their own prominence. And they're jostling for positions so they can run for president. And that is a shame. I think they put themselves first and the country second. You could have resolved this much easier, more easily using other methods. So I did not agree with the shutdown.
Okay, we'll skip the next question because you've already answered it. Next question, how are you going to react to the heavy lobbying and manipulation by special interests and maintain the integrity of small government?
Well, I do recognize that once you are elected, or in the 11th district, once you've won the primary, which is pretty close to being elected unless you screw the whole thing up. But once you're elected, the money will come out of the woodwork. Everybody wants to be your friend, and everybody wants favors, and everybody's willing to give you money, either through your committee or through a series of committees or a multi-pack, which I call a member pack. And I have the advantage, there's few advantages to being 64, which is what I am. I never thought I'd ever say that, but one being there aren't many advantages to being 64, but the upside of it, so to speak, is that being 64, I'm planning that what I need to do in Washington to help save our economy through elimination of corporate taxes would take about 3 or 4 years. And then I only plan to stay for a maximum of 8, is that being 64 and realizing that I'm not going to live forever. Based on family longevity, I have about 10 or 11 years left. It doesn't, being coerced by lobbyists on Cape Street won't have a big impact on me because we have good investment income. So we don't need money. I don't need to become rich. I used to be rich until I blew a load of it out in the stock market. But so you have more money, it doesn't make any difference. You still only can eat 3 meals a day. And I eat too much as it is. My weight keeps going up. So I have plenty of food to eat. Our bed is comfortable. I don't need to sleep on more than one bed at a time. I cannot sleep on one more bed at a time. And most importantly, we don't have any children. As such, we do have 2 cats, but the cats are not going to run for Congress.
4-legged children.
We have some 4-legged children, but they're definitely not going to run for Congress.
Okay.
One of the hidden secrets, which is why I won't be influenced by Kate Street, is that I tell the truth and I speak the way I think it is. And if people disagree, then they disagree. But most importantly, I'm not out to start a dynasty, a family dynasty, which is very common in the political circles. You get elected, then you keep the money you've saved in your campaign committee, and then you turn it over to your kids, and they already have a head start. They turn it over to their kids, and I can talk about Democrats and Republicans that have dynasties, and I disagree with them.
Okay, you're out of time on this question now, I'm
Sorry.
sorry. Thank you. Next question?
As our representative, what are you going to do to prevent the president from trampling the Constitution?
Well, that's a very difficult question. The concern that I have is that the executive office, the president, is slowly granting himself more and more power, nibble by nibble, to become, to put Congress to the side, if you will, and make the government run by an individual. I'm not only concerned about President Obama doing this, but once he sets a precedent, which he has, then future presidents will just grow that ability to rule by executive order and to selectively enforce laws. So I object to it. The best one can do, I think, without being there, is to be straightforward with the president. You work with him or her, as it may be the next time, and for the betterment of the country, not for the betterment of the political parties. You have polarized parties, Republicans and the Democratic Party, and there needs to be a middle ground where we can work together for the public good. The public has sent to Washington to represent the districts and represent the country, and they aren't doing a very good job of it. They just seem to be battling for effect rather than trying to resolve problems. They're not being practical.
Okay, thank you. Next question?
What is the,
Okay. Go ahead.
okay. What is the difference between a republic and a democracy?
Switzerland has the only true democracy as a first world power, if you will, and that's where the citizens vote up or down on certain legislation. They voted recently on immigration reform to accommodate the EU, and they were supposed to vote for what the European Parliament wanted, and they voted against it. So the populace votes in a democracy, and it worked well for Switzerland. We are a representative republic where people like me are elected to represent that district in Washington. I think that has morphed a bit into representing the country in Washington. That is to say, we're back to the story about full employment. If you can resolve national problems, they will filter back very quickly to a local area. But nevertheless, representing your district to the best of your abilities is key. Being open to what they want and solving their problems. But I don't think we want a democracy here because that becomes mob rule. I don't think we're looking for that.
Okay, thank you. Jack, next question.
Overall, do you think free trade with other countries helps or hurts the U.S. economy?
Well, it defines what, you have to define what is meant by free trade. If you mean trade that is, takes place on an even level, then broadly speaking, free trade is fine. Foreign governments subsidize their local businesses so that the foreign businesses have an unfair advantage, then it's no longer free trade. An example of that is the Chinese solar power industry. They get heavy subsidies from the Chinese government and have substantially undercut U.S. manufacturers who manufacture solar panels. Now, strictly speaking, there's nothing illegal in this, except for it isn't, in my mind, free trade. Now, whether or not our government, through its excise tax capabilities, taxes those products to bring them up to a level that will be considered to be reasonable, which still may be less expensive than domestic producers, is perhaps a good idea, worth studying. The issue is free trade an excuse for importing huge amounts of foreign products and borrowing money to pay for them to provide American consumers with very inexpensive products? And I would need to study more about that, but generally speaking, it's not a bad idea, except for it's badly enforced.
Okay, thank you.
Should candidates for public office be required to release their tax records?
Yes.
Okay.
What would you,
They don't do that. I thought everybody, when you run for federal office, something that isn't known is you have to release your records anyway. May not be your tax records per se, may not be your 1040 or your different schedules, but you do have to release records. Those records are held in Washington, and I'll give you an illustration of how that whole process has been subverted. A few years ago, for some amazing reason, Congress people became wealthy by investing in stocks just before the stocks went up dramatically. These same people happened to be on committees which would award very large contracts to companies, making them far more profitable based on what they did. And then they went out and bought the stock of the companies before that information became public. This would, on the outside of Washington, be known as insider trading. A law was passed unanimously, as I recall, where these records would have to be made public. This wouldn't be a little secret way to become rich when you went to Congress. And I understand that these records are still being made or still available publicly, but you now have to go to Washington to some basement where you can look up the physical pieces of paper to show who invested in what. The idea being is, yes, the law says you have to reveal your information, but the spirit of the law has been bypassed by changing it so it's no longer available on the internet, which is the global equalizer, if you will, and now made available only in paper form in a basement that you will never find. And there happen to be, when you go there, they'll happen to be closed for the day. But anyway, that's Washington. I can fix that too.
Okay, thank you. Next question.
what would you do to raise the approval rating of Congress?
Get them to resign is the quick answer. The public has, I think, something like a 13 or 14% approval of Congress. The problem we have is that everybody wants everybody but their own representative or senator to be replaced by somebody else. When everybody goes to the ballot, they'll vote for their same incumbent, so that nothing will change. But helping them resign, you can't force these people to resign unless it's a term limits amendment, which I said is unlikely to ever pass because of interests. You're trying to force these people out of their nice gravy train they've established for themselves, but you can, as I said, eliminate their pensions if they outstay their welcomes. And if you do that, they will leave. The problem, the second part of that problem, which I addressed earlier, is if you take away the campaign funds and give it to charities, several things will happen. One is that in that election year where they're going to have to give it away, they'll spend everything, every single penny, and we're going to be really bored with ads. Every ad on the television will be for a politician pitching themselves, but after that, and they clear the money out, and they get tired, the public gets tired of that, then charities, perhaps the top 50 or 100, can be have the money divvied up. But until we take the money out of the system, the same people will be elected over and over again. Another objection I'd like to put on the record, which is probably a Georgia issue more than any other, but I'm sure the federal government could comment on it. And that is, when a voter goes into the voting booth in the general election, they'll see an initial against they'll see either the word incumbent or they'll see the word Republican or Democrat. And nudges voters to vote either to the R's or to the D's and then to vote towards the incumbent. I don't think that's fair. But again, that's a state issue. I think that if it's just a name and the voters, for the most part, are not interested in politics and don't know who they're even going to vote for until they go to the voting booth, if you just had names without an indication of which party they belong to, it would force the public to pay attention to who they're electing into Washington. Okay.
Mr. Levene, the United States Postal Service has continued to request relief from Congress and has continued to take on debt. Do you support providing relief for the Postal Service or some other means such as privatization?
I wrote an article about this on my website, Allan, Levene for Congress. I have something like 200 articles that I wrote. My campaign manager says that I have writing diarrhea because I love to write these articles because it states my position exactly. So ahead of an election, I don't say, I feel your pain, I'm for a strong America, I support the Patriot Act, or whatever the slogan of the week is, so that I can generically say, vote for me because I'm going to solve your problems. I'd rather solve individual problems. And I wrote about the post office because the post office is being bankrupted by the federal government. So the answer is yes, I'd like to do something about it. What happened is there was a few lines entered into a bill which was passed by the House and the Senate and signed by the President, and it said that the post office has to immediately fund something like 70 years of pensions ahead of time. So they have to pre-fund these pensions. No other agency of the government, no other individual corporation is required to essentially bankrupt themselves to accommodate the federal law. I would strip out 2 or 3 sentences from that bill, the name of which escapes me for the moment, or that law, the name of which escapes me for the moment, because if you take that out, then they would have plenty of money. The result of that law is that the post office is now doing any backflips that it can to keep itself solvent, and is putting up the cost of postage because it has to, through any means possible, raise immense amounts of money. The exact numbers you can read on the article that I wrote, because I did some considerable research a long time ago, and I don't remember the exact details, and I wasn't privy to these questions ahead of time, so anyway, so I would fix it real easily, 2 sentences, problem's done.
What is your educational background?
I did not finish school in England. I studied business and photography. When I came over here, I studied I was in the insurance business, and then I got tired of that. I retired at 25. 6 employees, and I basically, I think 6, and I stopped working for a year and a half or 2 years. And then I studied finance, became a certified financial planner, was specialized in municipal finance. I do not have a college degree, but I did become a Series 7 and pass a variety of exams. I then left the municipal bond business. I was probably making too much money, and it was too easy. Back then I thought, let's try something else. I went into the computer business. And then I started and became a certified Novell engineer, which is an obsolete term nowadays. And then I became a Microsoft, what's the term? I don't use it very often. Certified MCSE systems engineer. Nobody cares about it anymore. Just they come in and fix the problems and we're happy. And my specialty is the internet security and data center work. I work with what I call storage area networks. I'm certified on ZFS. Z file system happens to be a big data file system. Big data is what the NSA uses. I just so happens I'm an expert in what they use from a technical point of view. So if I'm elected to Washington and I get on a committee that interviews the NSA, they will not lie to me, because from a technical point of view, I will understand exactly, I know exactly what they're doing, because I analyzed their Utah data center from a technical point of view, and because of my expertise in the Z file system, I will be proficient in doing one of the congressional hearings. They would not like me, I suspect.
Thank you.
In what ways does the foreign policy making process resemble the domestic policy making process?
When I was a teenager in England, my father subscribed to Newsweek, and he subscribed for something like 5 years during the Vietnam War. And I read everything, even the editorial column down there, who wrote which articles. There's a long series of long columns of who were the contributors. I devoured that Newsweek every single week for about 5 or 6 years. I concluded very early on that the United States was a wonderful country, but its foreign policy was horrible. I monitor international events every day. I monitor, because I used to do currency trading, foreign currencies every day. And I continue to conclude that we have a terrible foreign policy where we interfere with foreign nations that are independent nations, either to their betterment if we like them, they do what we tell them to, or to their detriment if we don't like them suddenly and they don't do what we tell them to. If we, for the most part, minded our own business, we would have far fewer problems overseas. So it's all the case of Washington screwing up our foreign policy and continuing to do so. It is diabolically awful. So if you want me to clarify what diabolically awful is, I mean,
30 seconds.
We attack nations, which subsequently we find out there was no reason to attack them. We try to subvert democratic countries in Central and South America because we don't like them. Are we out of time? Okay.
That question.
I could go on for about half an hour.
Next question.
Okay.
What are the United States elements of national power, and explain their importance?
Can you repeat that? I didn't quite catch all of that.
What are the United States elements of national power, and explain their importance?
Well, I used to live in San Diego, and I was in love with the United States Navy, and I never joined the military. I should have joined the U.S. Navy because I loved them. But nobody, my friends were in the Navy, they were officers, because I was in the insurance business. I had friends who were both officers and enlisted, and not one of them said, you know what, you keep raving about the Navy, why don't you join? Because I would have done a good job, but we all make mistakes in our life and don't do things we should have. That being said, I think that the Navy is amazing. I think that it has a way to project power globally and not need to fire its weapons, which is preferable to not projecting power and just going in and blowing things up. We have an extremely strong military, but it's also extremely expensive. The Pentagon has a natural desire to keep spending money. The different branches of the military and the different units within the military run off of budgets. And how the system works, which I'll go into an example in just a second if I have a moment, is that if you don't spend your budget, you won't have it the next year. It will be dropped. When I was in San Diego, my partner and I ran a municipal bond house, and we rented some space by what was known as Miramar Naval Air Station. I remember one day, it was like 1980, that we heard these F-4 Phantom jets going around and around and around and around right over our heads, which made it hard to do business when you had this roar of a jet engine. And I said to Jim, I said, what's this? And he said, oh, this is when they have to burn off their budget. They're just burning jet fuel so they won't get less the next budget. So our budget process needs to be changed. We need to change it not only to encourage people not to blow off huge volumes of money just to get rid of it because of budgets, but we need a strong military to be leaders, but we don't need to use it all the time, which is unfortunately we use it too often.
Okay, thank you.
As a follow-up, what is the military-industrial complex and how does it factor into foreign policy?
Well, the military-industrial complex is a group of companies, typically large American corporations, who profit from our military by making weapons and providing personnel for the military, and are very happy that we appear to be going potentially into another Cold War with Russia, because for them, the only thing that's interesting to them is how much money they can make. When the Berlin Wall fell and the Soviet Union collapsed, I thought to myself, this is the worst possible thing for the military-industrial complex, because the defense industries won't have anything to build. There's no longer an enemy, just an enemy out there. They will not be able to the Pentagon will not be able to justify their budgets, and that will mean a lessening of the money spent by corporations. Corporations have operations in all 50 states, so that everybody has a piece of the deal. They are good politicians, if you will. Corporations, there was one corporation that I followed in California that was working on developing titanium bicycles because their orders for defense weapons was drying up. They had to find something else to do. And it's so sad. So they're in bed with the military, providing never-ending supplies of sophisticated weapons, helping spend the taxpayers' money, when many of these weapons have huge cost overruns and have no practical value, except for perhaps providing employment within those districts.
Thank you.
Thank you. Jeff?
What do you see as being the current largest threat to the U.S. geopolitical interests?
Other than me saying the biggest threat to the U.S. is Washington because of its misuse of funds, our biggest threat is going to come from China, and it's coming from China economically. The underreported or unreported fact is that about a month or so ago, the sum of China's imports and exports for the very first time exceeded ours. It's really important, unreported on the national news. The national news is more interested in fluffy stories than it isn't actually news anymore. China's growth rate is something like 7.25%, and they have a vast surplus of money, and they will within 5 or 6 years exceed us in GDP. In the next 4 years, I predict that the US dollar, unless we fix it through this elimination of corporate taxes, will fail, meaning that foreign governments will no longer want to loan us any money because they believe we cannot possibly ever pay it back. And they will look to another country, quite likely China, to become the backbone of the global economy. And then you'll no longer use the term almighty dollar. It will be the almighty yuan, or renminbi as it's known. When that happens, we are in big, big, irreversible trouble. In 1944, in Bretton Woods in Vermont, the British government surrendered the reserve currency status of the British pound to the United States dollar. And at that point, our money became the almighty dollar, and this country has boomed like it never did before. Great Britain,
Sorry,
you know,
sorry. Next question, Aaron.
What do you see as being the current largest threat to domestic security?
the typical answer, I think, is terrorism. But I think that I do not believe that there is a serious terrorist threat in this country. If there was, terrorists would smuggle high explosives across the Mexican border with the thousands and thousands of pounds of drugs, which are being smuggled in all the time, and they would use them domestically, and they haven't. So I keep wondering, I'm glad that they haven't, and I'm glad that they don't. So I don't think that terrorism, domestic terrorism, is a major issue. It's a major issue from our government because it's created an entire industry to defeat terrorism, terrorism being amorphous, and you never actually win anything, you just keep fighting it forever, like the war on poverty or the war on drugs. I cannot think of a single major domestic issue that there is that I would consider at this time to be a threat, using the perhaps a pejorative term for threat, and not just we have a threat. There are individual acts of terrorism, Boston bombings, for example, but they were horrible terrorist events, but nevertheless, it could be much, much worse. It isn't, which is really good.
Okay, a couple more questions, we're almost finished. Are you currently connected to any outstanding unpaid taxes in any way?
No.
And like I
No,
mentioned before, we
no.
ask all questions,
No.
the same questions to them. Okay.
All the taxes are paid.
Okay, good. Please describe one instance in which you faced an ethical dilemma and how you resolved it.
That is really hard to do because I pride myself in telling the truth. And even though it may be uncomfortable for people to hear it, they hear it anyway. And then I don't have a clean conscience. So I cannot think of an ethical issue that I have. No, frankly, I can't think of one which
Okay.
comes to mind.
That's fine, thank you. Our last question, what we try to do, and we want to thank you first of all for accepting our invitation to be interviewed, because this is to the benefit of our voters in the district, of course, and anyone who wants to watch it, because it will be on the internet. We want to thank you for that opportunity that you're giving the voters, in other words. We respect you for that decision, and by all means. We want to give you just 2 minutes here to state whether or not there's anything else we should know, or the voters should know, that has not already been discussed today.
Well, I haven't discussed a lot of topics which I wrote about on my website, Allan, Levene for Congress. There's 200 topics, possibly address more than a couple. I would urge the voters to do that. I do appreciate your time and the effort you're putting into this. This is really nice. I didn't expect this. I've talked about my main areas that I want to make a difference. Being a naturalized American citizen, I look at this country differently than you do because I wasn't lucky enough to be born here. And I have a tremendous debt to this country. I've done very, very well. As I said, I'm retired at 25, which was to me amazing. I made plenty of money in the municipal bond business. It's a fun business to be in. I've loved the technology business. I'm now fortunate enough not to ever have to work again. But I like to work, and I just can't sit around and watch television. It's not my nature. And I do want to represent this district in Washington because we have some fundamental, potentially disastrous issues that I see occurring in the next 4 years. Because I was brought up with British history, and I studied how the United Kingdom started to fail when it lost its reserve currency status for the British pound. And the British pound has been slowly being devalued ever since. It's going to happen here. I'm the only one who's seen this firsthand. I've seen the National Health Service in Great Britain and how mediocre it is. And I see how good this system we have here in the medical business and how good it is and how it will be damaged irrevocably if we go to a single-payer national health system. I do not like that people game the system. They're not willing to work and they take it all for granted. This is an amazing country. I want to keep it amazing, and I want to make this country golden for somebody else's children. As I said, we don't have any kids. So when my wife and I are gone, we'll be forgotten and that will be it. But I have such a debt to this country that I want to repay it. And I can repay it. I know how to do it by doing what's right in Washington, forming a caucus of like-minded people and fixing the problems. Being in the IT business, people don't come to me. They said, well, our storage area network is failing, we're getting intermittent failures, what's wrong? They don't want me to tell them what is wrong with their product, what they've got. They want me to fix it. I spent 30 years fixing problems, and I know, I look at people typically go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that being 5 being the destination. I say, what's the outcome that I want? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So I know the steps I have to take from looking at the problems backwards, and I resolve problems and I fix problems, and I have very happy customers. So I just want to do what's right by the American public, and I want to fix fundamental problems that Washington has and do a great job and then leave.
Great. Well, thank you very much for your time today. We greatly appreciate it. And I hope you enjoyed the process and respect the process. It's very important to everyone that we know more about our candidates. And it's not always easy to do that in individual meetings and so on. So we respect your time. Thank you very much.
I'm so happy to be here. Am I still on camera?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I'm just happy. This is fun. Of course, not knowing what the questions were, it gave me a chance to come up with, as with our Post Office Accountability Act, whatever the name